This is the final chapter of the book Gonzo Education. It's chapter 10, titled Todo o Nada. That means all or nothing in Spanish. I survived my first semester at UT under pretty difficult circumstances. Normally, when you're homeless, you're kind of carefree. I didn't have a problem with being homeless. That was something I was used to. What I had a problem with was being homeless and sitting in a room with a horde of rich white kids who never worked a day in their life, looking down on me for not getting money off my parents like they did. That's where I had the problem. Maybe if they knew the road I traveled and everything I'd been through to get there, they would have been a little nicer. I lived in the West Campus house, Adams Housing Projects, the back seat of my car, and Chris and Summer's Hyde Park apartment all during my first semester at UT. I always wondered what life would be like as a student there, but what I experienced wasn't exactly how I pictured it. Before the start of my second semester, I was determined to have a better attitude towards school and the people I met. I knew the most important thing was to register for large classes in big auditoriums. This way I could sit in the back and keep to myself and not be snickered at by fancy-looking white kids with pointy noses and expensive loafers. I made a good friend that summer named Charles. He was the same age and from the same kind of neighborhoods as everyone else, but I guess I gave him more credit because he was black. Out of a class of 30 people, Charles and I seemed to stick out the most. At least we were the two people most kids were looking at, trying to get a read on. I got along better with foreign students too. UT has more international students than any other school in the country, and for whatever reason, I guess I just couldn't relate to the kind of white kids I grew up with, the ones who had spent their entire lives living off their parents' money, the 20-somethings with hands that looked like they'd been soaking in dishwashing liquid. One class, I sat next to Charles and started up a conversation about basketball. I didn't bring it up because he was black. I brought it up because he wore a different NBA basketball jersey every day. We became friends and had a lot in common. We both called ourselves writers. We were both big NBA fans, and we both preferred smoking pot over drinking. Including my 3 years at ACC, this was my fourth year of college, so I'd already figured out how to research courses, instructors, and grade distribution before I even thought about registering for any particular course. After my first semester at UT, I needed to get my GPA up to keep getting financial aid, so for the next few semesters, I registered for classes with a lot of student athletes in them. I figured that with all the hours of practice, meetings, and games, the instructors had to be a little less demanding. I also knew that I'd get along much better with black athletes who got themselves to UT by working hard compared to wealthy white kids who wouldn't be there without their parents' money. I made friends with a few basketball and football players in each of my classes. Most of them came from tough backgrounds where they didn't get things handed to them. Out of all my classmates, they were basically some of the only ones just as self-made as I was. The only difference was that they used their athletic intelligence to get to UT, and I got there with a combination of book smarts and wit. There's a fleet of burnt orange buses that drive around the 40 acres campus, picking up and dropping off the 74,000 students, faculty, and staff. One day during my second semester, I got on a bus packed with students. Classes were ending for the day, and there was someone in every seat on the front part of the bus. I looked toward the back and saw only one person sitting there by himself. I didn't understand why everyone was packed up in the front, nearly sitting on top of each other, when there was plenty of room right there in the back. What, were they scared to sit next to the tall black kid? I rolled my eyes and headed to the empty seats in the back, leaving a few seats in between me and the black kid. I sat down and gave my long legs a much-needed stretch. The sight of my legs stretched out sometimes bothers people on buses, but when I looked up at the guy next to me, I noticed his knees actually went up higher than mine. Wow, you actually have longer legs than I do. You play football? No, basketball, he said. Oh, I love basketball. What's your name? Kevin Durant. Awesome, I'll Google you when I get home. He said he'd see me later and got off the bus with a sly grin. When I got home, I looked him up and found out he was one of the top college players in the country and was going to be a top pick in that year's draft. Another friend I made that semester was the first McDonald's All-American to play for the basketball team. He was drafted by the Celtics in 1999, but he never played in the NBA. Instead, he played in Italy. I was a big fan of Chris Clapp back in the day, and on draft night, I was hoping the Spurs were going to take him early in the second round. I remember cursing at the TV when they announced they were taking a then unknown lefty from Argentina named Manu Ginobili. This was 10 years since Chris was a star player for the basketball team. We had a few classes together and became friends in a class called Lying and Deviance. He sat right next to me, and one day we started talking about the class. Being a huge basketball fan, I knew exactly who he was, but I played it cool so I wouldn't come off as stalkerish. What's your name? I asked. Oh, Chris with a K, you say? By that time, playing days were pretty much over. He had an on again, off again relationship with the Spurs minor league affiliate, but he was mainly concentrating on getting his UT college degree. I enjoyed going to school more often after I found someone cool to hang out with. Me and Chris would cruise around campus in his black sports car smoking blunts before class. I only had large classes and huge auditoriums at that time, so it wasn't hard to sit in the back and pretend I was at the movies. I started to see my time at UT as a chance to put my memory to work and soak up a bunch of useful information. My favorite class was American Literature. It was taught by a tiny, charismatic, bald man. There were about 300 students in the class, but the instructor made it clear on the first day that he didn't want to hear a question, comment, or single peep out of any of them. I liked his style. I didn't bother him, and he didn't bother me. I already had enough to deal with and wasn't looking for a social experience in every class like a lot of other students were. This was a time in my life where I didn't like talking in front of people, anyways. It was comforting knowing that no one had an opportunity to give me shit, and even more important because I enjoyed the material. We studied American writers, and it was my first introduction to Whitman and Twain. The instructor spoke with the strength of 100 little bald men and explained poetry with passion I've never seen before. After my second semester, I started looking for a place to rent. I had a little money saved, but I still couldn't get a regular apartment because of my shabby rental history. I didn't want any roommates besides Michael, but other than that, I didn't really care how the place looked. My only preference was that it was somewhat near campus. The only listing on Craigslist in my price range was actually the cheapest room on the whole website, so I figured it was a scam. The place listed for rent was a studio slash office in Hyde Park, the most sought after area of Austin and the city's first suburb. All the houses are overpriced, with neighborhood streets lined with Texas oak trees that shade the fancy cottages. It's close to the city center, but it's far enough from the noise, pollution, and traffic that go with UT. When I got there, I saw why the place was so cheap. The unit for rent was a tiny, moldy shithole that hadn't been lived in for half a century. It was hidden in the finely manicured backyard of $1 million home. The building for rent was originally for the main house's servants in Hyde Park's early days. I guess they had little people working for them because the shack's ceilings were only 7 feet tall. The short ceilings weren't as bad as the carcinogenic stench of mold that hit you the second you opened the door. There were ants, fleas, and a family of cockroaches that gave me a look like I was trespassing. The place was so filthy you could almost see the bacteria swimming in the air and dancing on the walls. The only charming part of the shanty was the water damage left on the ceiling. It formed in a way that resembled the silhouette of Alfred Hitchcock's skull. The place did have its advantages. There was nothing this cheap. It had free water and electricity rigged through the main house, and it was hidden from view from the haughty-daughty neighbors and rich kids. Before we moved in, the landlord vaguely explained that the city officials didn't want him to rent out the place and had specifically instructed him that nobody was supposed to live there. He said if anyone came around asking questions, then for us to tell them that we weren't living there and just using the place as an office and art studio. I paid too much rent in advance and still had enough left to fix my car, buy a used computer, a couple textbooks, and give Chris and Summer what I had left. I finally had my own place to live in and come home to after school, so I knew my grades were bound to improve. I didn't see Chris and Summer too much after I moved out, but I'll never forget what they did for me. They didn't expect anything in return and they knew I couldn't help them anytime soon anyways. They put up with me and let me sleep on their couch for a couple months without me having to worry about getting kicked out. I ran into Summer a few months later on the drag. She said she'd been doing a lot of hard drugs with Chris and dropped out of UT with one class remaining for her degree, speech. Chris convinced her to join a traveling carnival and they were leaving for Louisiana in 2 days. By the end of my second semester, I figured I'd survive UT as long as I had somewhere to live. I gave up on making friends and hooking up with girls and basically just tried to stay out of everyone's way. I never thought I'd be lonely. I thought I'd always try to contact Benny or Jonathan. It'd been the longest I've been without speaking to them, but my ego would have let me. For years, whenever I talked about going to UT, back in the day, it was always, when I get there, I'm going to be dating a hot chick, have cool friends, and be the point guard of the basketball team. That wasn't my reality, not even close, and I couldn't just step up and admit it, especially not to someone who actually knew me, like Benny. People make a big deal out of me, but it wasn't the same kind of attention I'd get if I was on the basketball team. Kids who didn't like me let me know the second they saw me. I was used to it, and I could get why sheltered students and their lack of experience of being around anyone unlike themselves saw me as a threat. but I'll never understand why so many adult professors acted unprofessionally. College instructors not raised in the United States didn't grow up with the not so subtle psychological backdrop of Horatio Alger's pulling yourself up by your bootstraps model of America, the familiar archetype tied into so many movies, TV shows, and inner city schools. The idea that you can start out life anywhere in this great country, and if you just work hard enough and apply yourself, you can become an astronaut, a professional ball player, or even the president. One instructor I had was born and raised in Europe. in Europe. In Europe, and on the first day, he thought he'd impress the class by bragging about his Corvette and Hummer, obviously misunderstanding the bravado aspect of U.S. culture. I remember him saying how proud he was that he'd gotten his PhD by the time he was 30. Then he looked directly at me and paused for a few seconds until a frat boy let out a childish sneer. My fondest memory of the European import came when he called me out in front of the class while I was giving an oral presentation. We were supposed to make a website and show it to the class, but I put very little time into mine and came in with something half-assed. I was hoping I wouldn't have to turn it in until the next class period, which would give me the weekend to come up with something decent. "This is horrible," I remember him saying. "This, Greg, this is why you're whatever age and still haven't graduated college." I stood in front of the class, kinda in shock. One girl gave him the meanest look I'd ever seen, and with the overall vibe in the room, the immigrant knew he misspoke. Knowing me, I'm surprised I didn't get all pissy or run away crying or at least punch him in the face. But deep down, I knew he was right. It was something I needed to hear. My newspaper boss, John, used to tell me the same thing. "Dude, if you used everything you're blessed with, all the potential, all those things down that every once in a while peaks out, you'd be at the top of the food chain." The professor let me redo the assignment, and I came in the next class with a decent looking website. "See, Greg," he said, "this is what I was talking about. This looks like a great website, like an actual website." That was the first part of chapter 10, Todo Onada from the book Gonzo Education. That's just some drug addict coughing outside my window. He's always like yelling and screaming. He hates reading, but don't mind him. The book's available for free on Kindle. You can get it for $5 or $6 on Amazon. And I'm going to be reading these again too, so I'm not going to be stopped by some coughing druggie. I'm going to be also reading this in a regular studio. This channel is only going to keep building, and I'm only going to keep building as well. Thanks for watching. Click the thumbs up.